Hey everyone, and welcome to GameDive, the conversation podcast where we take a look at one game each episode and have an in-depth discussion about the game's strengths and weaknesses. I'm Perry, and joining me as always is Cam, Mark, and Evan. And this episode we're going to be talking about Uncharted: Drake's Fortune. So Uncharted is of course the classic PlayStation 3 exclusive action adventure shooter, which was released on November 20th of 2007. Game was published by Sony Computer Entertainment and developed by Naughty Dog, the same studio that brought us the well-known Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, and The Last of Us games. So, just for some background, I'll start off by saying I've only just played this game recently for the first time, and some parts haven't aged super well. But I think it's important to look at the context of the games, other games that were being released around the same time in 2007. So that was actually a pretty incredible year, which saw the release of such classics as Assassin's Creed, Super Mario Galaxy, Mass Effect, Halo 3, COD Modern Warfare, Portal, Bioshock, and of course Cooking Mama 2, Dinner with Friends. And that was all in the space of just 3 months. So, I mean, if you compare Uncharted with a lot of those games, I think it holds up pretty well. But we'll get to that pretty soon. I should mention also that most of us have been playing the remastered edition that came with the Nathan Drake collection released for PS4. I think Mark, you're the only one who's played the original PS3 release, right?
No. This is actually the first time I've ever played the first Uncharted game.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we've all played the remastered edition then. So yeah, anyway, I think we'll just get right into it. Mark, why don't you start us off with your thoughts on the gameplay?
Yeah, so as you were saying, like it's definitely a bit dated, but I guess in context of the other games at the time, like having started the game series with Uncharted 2 and then going backwards, it feels like whoa, like you can definitely tell like this is the first time they've ever done this, having played previous Naughty Dog titles. And
Right.
I believe like this is the first time this is the first new gen game that they ever done. So
That's right, for PS3.
yeah, it's kind of like a accomplishment for them that as a in the story, small great things come from small beginnings has kind of evolved with the franchise going forward.
Yeah. I mean, especially around this time, we saw like a bunch of the games that I just listed there were the first entries in what would end up being, larger series that, would iterate on what they started with. And stuff like Assassin's Creed and Mass Effect, their first entries were pretty rough and not the best entries in their series at this point. So,
Yeah, definitely. Like going back to when Evan and I first played Bioshock. Again, going back to that, the first game in the series always that treading the waters a bit, and then probably by the second, or hopefully by the second, they kind of get into the groove of what they actually want to do with the game and like knock out any kinks.
Yeah, going back to the first entries in the long-standing series is often not a perfect experience, and like Mark said, BioShock was a decent example of that, and I think Uncharted, Drake's Fortune is another.
Yeah.
Obviously, not a bad game, I don't think, but, you have to play it understanding or keeping in mind that you're playing a game from 2007, and at which point is 13 years old, and there's only so much you can do in a remaster, in particular that, you know, brings that up to any type of modern standard.
We also got to remember that as tired as third-person cover shooters are now, it was still, in its infancy when this game came out. It wasn't really the big juggernaut that it came to be as a gameplay style.
Yeah, I mean, what did, Naughty Dog do before this? It was Jak and Daxter and
Crash Bandicoot.
Crash Bandicoot. So,
Crash
going
Nitro
from
Kart.
going from those to Uncharted, at the time, is a crazy, shift in terms of, sort of presentation quality and
oh,
what,
absolutely.
just the scale of what they were trying to, do with it. So, I think, it's impressive, but it's impressive for a 2007 release.
Oh, yeah, and especially because like the PlayStation 3 just came out like new. Like
Was
I
it a
think
launch title?
no, it wasn't a launch that it came out. I think the PlayStation 3 came out 2006.
Yeah, it was about one full year after the
Yeah,
launch of the PS3 that this came out.
Okay.
and I think the only comparable third-person shooter title would have to be, at least from my memory, either Gears of War and maybe Resident Evil 4 that came out in 2005. So again, like there wasn't a whole lot of third-person shooter games.
I mean, the first Mass Effect did a lot of cover shooting as well. Am I wrong?
It did, but the thing is that the first Mass Effect, actually, the cover shooting was quite rough, and by comparison to Uncharted, a lot worse, I would say.
Hmm.
So they definitely did quite admirably there, and but yeah, also Gears of War, which came out a year before this game, I think was a
Yeah,
little more polished and a
if you're
little.
able to like graph them, it'd be Mass Effect definitely the worst, and then Gears of War at the best in terms of cover shooter, and then Uncharted fits in like a nice, comfortable second place in terms of those three
Like, it's
games,
just right.
just in terms of cover shooting mechanics.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, like I definitely find like the cover shooting mechanics kind of just like, I guess, bare minimum would be the best way to describe it, because it doesn't go into detail. Like, it's just your basic get in the cover and start shooting people, or which in later titles in Uncharted series they kind of expanded that. But again,
Yeah, it's
Uncharted 1 is
something
just
that like us playing it for the first time, like right now, it seems like something we've already done like many times in other games. So and as you say, it is pretty basic. You just most of your encounters are going to play out that you take cover and you pop out of cover to shoot a couple of guys. You stay in cover for a second to heal. Sometimes you roll out of the way of a grenade, and it's like very basic gameplay loops.
Yeah, and for the first foray into the generation that it came out in, and the shift in how games were being designed, I think it's hard to expect much more than that.
right. I guess like comparing from like games we play nowadays, it's like, oh, okay, like we played a bunch of cover-based shooters.
Of
Now
course, but going back then, imagining we're starting to play that after,
it's like, whoa.
Crash Bandicoot, this is mind-blowing stuff, even if it's a fairly simple combat loop.
I believe the game before this was Jack X Combat Racing, which was just
Big
a
shoes to
combat.
fill.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, okay. But yeah, like again, gameplay wise, it was kind of interesting to see how melee combat kind of started in the Uncharted series, because in like the 2 and 3 and 4 they like expanded it like heavily, but in 1, like I rarely find myself getting into melee combat.
I mean, when enemies can blow you away in
Yeah,
one shot in some
God,
situations, it doesn't really lend itself.
especially in the higher difficulties. It's like, God.
I will say that I do like how they added something more than just like a standard melee bash. How it was almost like a
Yeah,
combo thing, and if you were able to like get up and combo people, they would drop extra ammo. So I thought it was like a decently well thought out mechanic. I just don't think it was in place that well.
I never found myself pulling off the square triangle square combo. I always just bashed on square.
I think the thing is just there wasn't a lot of reasonable opportunities to use it. I probably meleeed maybe 5 enemies through the whole game.
I believe it's 6 according to the in-game tracker.
Getting called out. Yeah, okay, so 6 guys. But just because of the way the encounters play out, you usually walk into your area with your chest high cover, and then you'll have a good distance between you and the enemies. But they do attempt to flank you and rush you, some of them. But again,
They're
it's not the
so
best
aggressive
solution
with
to
that.
punch them most of the time.
Yeah.
That also reminds me of another thing. So where maybe Naughty Dog didn't quite understand exactly how their game was going to be played, and one I think is a great kind of evidence of that is there's a trophy which is to like have 50 stealth kills or something like that, and there's like maybe 1 or 2 like
There's like
stealth kills in the whole game, right? It's not something that's in the game. The fact that they thought that you'd maybe if you played through the game twice you'd get to 50 is they were just so unbelievably wrong.
I think the first
Yeah.
time you get to like a stealth, like where you can do like a stealth takedown, it's like chapter 4 after coming down like this big hill, and they're all like all the enemies are just looking away in these ruins. It's like, okay, this is the perfect opportunity where you can go in for a stealth takedown. But like the game actually doesn't really tell you you can do that. It's like something you get to
Yeah,
kind of
it
just
does
do.
seem like a bit of a throwaway mechanic. Like it
I
wasn't.
mean, I think they were probably fairly clearly not going for stealth, and this released the same year as Assassin's Creed, the first release there, and I think they had a very clear idea in mind, even if they threw in these sort of catch-all trophies, assuming someone would try and do it at some point. I don't think they wanted
Well, it makes me
Uncharted to
wonder
be there.
because in the other games there are sections that you can like there are actually some sections you can 100% stealth. So it makes me wonder if maybe they thought it was going to be a larger part of the game, but just the way the AI and the intelligence of the enemies played out, it just didn't work.
Yeah, it's possible that it's something they had planned to do more when they were developing it, but for whatever reason, they never really made any areas where it made sense to do that, except for maybe one or two.
Yeah, it did not come out in the wash.
I will add some future knowledge to this that stealth doesn't really make a huge impact until like I think Uncharted 4.
Yeah, I mean, when I think Uncharted, I'm thinking bombastic action set pieces.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that stealth is necessarily something that this game needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could fit. I mean, obviously, if you're in a situation where you're trying to get through an area full of, goons who would kill you first chance they get, stealth makes sense, but it might not have been the focus. There could have been later encounters where it's possible or necessarily, but it's an action game. It's Indiana Jones the video game.
Well, in the same way that like discount third person shooter like cover shooters are so generic now, like the whole you can use stealth if you want to option wasn't really that outplayed back then either.
That's true. Yeah.
And I mean it kind of fits, right? Nathan Drake, like you think he's more of a thief and like kind of a stealthy guy more than Rambo, but I mean, obviously we know how that turns out.
More than pirates are coming, get ready to kill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Do you know how to use a gun? Yeah. No. Okay.
you do
There you
know.
go. Oh, going back to Cam's point about trophies, I believe trophies actually wasn't integrated into the game until later when
True.
like a PlayStation 3 added trophies for a bunch of other titles. So at the time, I believe it started as an in-game medal system, which when trophies were added, those same medals became trophies. But the unfortunate thing is that it actually had players redo those medals in order to register as a trophy.
Damn, that would suck.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not even like I have the platinum for this game. It's actually not that hard. It doesn't take that long.
I mean, unless you're going for crushing, or was it brutal? That's the hardest.
No, you have to do it on crushing. And I mean, crushing is hard, and we'll talk about how that much of a piece of shit that can be. But I mean, all in all, I don't like the game really did not take me that long to platinum. It's a pretty quick platinum.
And the treasure, like finding collectibles in that game, it's not that hard.
I mean, compared to how games have kind of exploded in terms of scale, or so it seems lately. It's not bad having a short and sweet game, and little narrative action that you can get through within a few playthroughs.
Yeah, like it definitely feels like one of those like movie experiences in a way.
Yeah, I mean, not every game has to be 20 hours, I think. Like, as long as you can make like a good 8 to 10 hours experience, then that's what really matters.
So, going back to the gameplay, it's like, what did we think of the actual, I think combat and exploration, I guess you could call it, mild platforming is probably the major interactive mechanics in the game. How did you guys find it? Because I sure know how I did. And I wasn't huge on it.
Yeah, there
Well,
just
I'll
seems
say
like there's a
that
lot of the
the
climbing.
shooting at first feels a little floaty and the aiming a little imprecise, and it just felt like, I don't know, not that impactful, I guess.
Yeah,
You really just spend the entire game either climbing, shooting, or moving forward. You never really kind of explore. Like it's a linear game itself. You go from point A to point B, enter an arena, have waves of enemies come at you. Hopefully you survive, and then continue forward and repeat.
I think one of the best things you can do to increase the playability of this game is increase the sensitivity. I think the base sensitivity is way too low. And I think like I would have agreed with you if I never turned it up that, yeah, the aiming just feels like imprecise, not that great. But if you turn up the sensitivity, like honestly, you get into some moments when you almost hit like flick shots and it's actually really, really engaging. it made like a world of difference.
So it, begs the question, why wasn't that the base? Like, were
Well,
they worried that people playing this new, relatively new style would sort of have difficulties with sensitive controls?
possible. I mean, like this is also before the genesis of like first person shooters being everywhere, and also again like the genesis of big even just third person shooters where I feel like most people, especially on the PlayStation, are more, used to Jack and Daxter games or Ratchet and Clank games, right? Where you're not really worried about precise aiming.
You're just aiming at the crosshair and kill the enemy.
Well, it's funny. I mean, it's like you say that, but it's one thing that I found, like sort of out of place almost, where their way that it seemed like they wanted you to sometimes explore more complex environments. And the opening of the game, I think, is a good example where you're trying to get into that temple after the sort of opening set piece with the coffin. It's the way to get in is you have to climb up something, jump across like what, six or so little pillars, towers, I don't know, piles of
Colors, yeah.
rocks.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. You just jump from one to the other, the other. And they make it difficult. Like you can fall, but it's this weird, like they've added this element of platforming almost. And
Like there's no
well,
way you can fail those either.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
there is.
yeah,
There's
there is.
some of the rocks blow up and fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
Yeah,
mean that's it.
but they add ways to make it seemingly difficult, but it's either going to be a little set piece where, like Cam says, the rocks will crumble and you go around again to make it a bit more dynamic feeling. But it reminds me of Bioshock, where it was this sort of middle sort of game between two different ideas of how to interact in a game with like how they build up your engagement. And they add platforming to this third person narrative cover shooter as a way to do that, and it just seems sort of out of place to me.
I think from a theming perspective, it makes sense that if you are this treasure hunter in this lost civilization, that you will have to clamber around and have to move around some
That's
broken
true,
structures and that sort of thing. I think from the theming perspective, it makes sense there.
right? But I don't think the depth of the actual mechanics and controls, let it pay off.
I would agree with you there. It's more of an instead of making it overtly difficult for you to complete certain areas, they kind of play out sequences or set pieces that make you feel like, oh, this is dangerous, this is
Like
risky.
Spider-Man, make you feel like Spider-Man.
Exactly. It makes me feel like Nathan Drake. Um, no, but same thing with like the rocks crumbling. I mean, it's like honestly, like if you weren't to react, you could fall. But like honestly, like all you have to do is push the A button, which you're already doing. So I
Right.
mean, I think it's smart in the fact that it adds some tension to it. Like even if it's artificially, it still makes it
Yeah.
more engaging. And I feel like back then that was probably a lot more effective than it is now because we just seen so many games that do it better, like
Mm.
artificially increase tension in certain areas. But
Yeah, I mean, a lot of games will put you, the player or the character, in situations that are treacherous if they were realistic, but they aren't actually necessarily treacherous for the player controlling it. And for a lot of the climbing, you're just holding right on the stick and pressing X to jump most of the time. So it's not necessarily that treacherous except for those rocks falling.
mhm.
Yeah, or just the controls being janky, as I think probably a lot of people have experienced in the sort of later in the game where you're going through the rafters in like a cathedral,
Oh yeah.
and you have to
Oh
sort of
yeah.
rotate around portions and jump from one to the other, and it really really shows its age there in just terms of the sort of how precise the controls can be or can't be in this situation. Or I found myself failing at it like more than a few times just due to the input seemingly going wrong, not how I had intended it to go.
The simplest example of that is trying to press B to like drop to a ledge and then not dropping to the ledge you feel you're closest to that you're trying to, and then kind of like moonwalking backwards to drop onto the ledge behind you that you just got up from. It's like it's not the end of the world, but again, it just like it's annoying and it ruins my fun. So
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be fighting with the controls to do what you're trying to do in a game
Yeah,
ever.
absolutely. One of the most frustrating experiences in a game can absolutely be inputs not doing what you intended for them to do. And yeah, I feel like that's a lot of older games, sort of in these middle generations, I think, tend to have this problem. And if a player fails due to no fault of their own, that's absolutely like a crushing experience and just loses all sense of momentum and motivation.
Yeah, and I mean there are certain parts that seem like they're a bit overlooked in terms of their difficulty, and that cathedral bit you mentioned where you're jumping from all these planks and the rafters is definitely one of them. And there are certain encounters that just feel kind of hopeless in how many guys they throw at you and what they expect you to be capable of. At least, I played on hard difficulty, which is just one up from normal. But so yeah, it shows its age in that way, and especially for a game like this where it was clear they wanted it to be about the adventure and the immersion. There's some parts where they definitely overlooked having the player really get roadblocked for like a solid chunk of time, which is not what they wanted for this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes down to I don't know, like a large problem in game design, which is sort of this conflict between narrative and gameplay, where gameplay can hamper narrative, and the other way around as well, where narrative can hamper the experience of the gameplay. And I think in Uncharted's case, it's the gameplay hampering the narrative, where that you have this sense of urgency or speed, and I'd say very much the final encounter where you're finally catching the guy who's been doing this whole thing, and you're trying to get through different waves and sections of his goons and lackeys to finally get to him. It's supposed to be this climactic moment, and you have this momentum going into it, and the narrative is pushing how intense and time sensitive it is. And then you play it 20 times because you just keep getting shot in one hit, because you didn't realize this guy can just get you as soon as you come out of cover.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happens, the impact is gone, and it really harms how you end up experiencing this narrative, which they've been trying to tell for the last however many hours, like 8 hours.
So you all the time tell me about how like I like to play on crushing and hard difficulties, and that's not what most people are supposed to play on. I really do in this game feel that normal is the proper difficulty to play on. Because you're right, the game doesn't flow when you have to spend forever in cover, and when you can't use the run and gun mechanic, and when you constantly keep getting set back and you have to stay in the same room in the same encounter for a multiple amount of tries. It really does break up the action. As much as like I think it can be really fun on crushing because of those reasons. I think especially from a narrative perspective at the end, it kills any momentum it could possibly hope to have.
Yeah, in that regard, it almost feels like the higher difficulties. I've played on hard as well as normal, and I did find normal fairly easy, but I think that the higher difficulties should almost be like sort of indicated that they're meant for like a second playthrough, where you've experienced the narrative the way they wanted to tell it and present it, and now you're going in for a challenge. Or
Well, I
someone
think
who
the
plays a
easy
lot of
solution
games.
there would be if you just lock those higher difficulties behind the prerequisite of beating it once on normal, which is what a lot of games do for probably that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. That would
I
be a
think that would work
perfectly good
here.
way. Yeah.
In a way, but I think like if I were to play through on normal the first time, well, maybe because the game can be somewhat cinematic, it would still be fairly enjoyable. But I think out of the playthroughs I had that I enjoyed the most, it was definitely my crushing playthrough.
Really.
Oh hell
I
yeah!
mean, not all of us are sadomasochists.
Well,
So
but I mean, you didn't play crushing the first time though, right?
No, I did.
Oh, okay. Oh, they give you the
like
option.
I said.
Yeah, they give you the option right
Oh,
off the
okay.
bat.
So you can't play brutal right off the bat, which is locked. So the difference being, I think normal has you have half health and the enemies do 2 times damage to you.
I
So
think you have it back or other way around on normal. Nathan has 2 times health. The enemies do 0.5 damage.
oh yeah, and then like crushing, you still have half your health, and then the enemies do 4 times damage. And like crushing, like playing through crushing, I had no interest in even attempting brutal. So okay, lock that one away. Like as someone who like enjoys difficulty, like fuck that. Like no thanks.
You'll notice that as a common trend with the rest of the Uncharted series.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, important to protect the player in a way from their own potential decision making and on that front if you want to get this narrative experience across.
Yeah, because someone going into it who thinks they're experienced, they have a lot of, you know, practice playing shooters and cover shooters, and they think, I can do this. Why would I start normal? And suddenly they don't enjoy the game because of all this narrative, slowdown and blocking due to the difficulty. This person instantly has a different opinion of the game than someone who wouldn't have had these issues.
I think it would have made more of a difference for me if it was a stronger narrative game. But as the narrative as it is and the story as it is and the pacing that it presents, it wasn't the worst. Like again, like the end sequence is obviously the most glaring one, and there's probably a couple in between. But honestly, there's some rooms that I didn't really care to get stuck in terms of pacing, and it was just like I enjoyed the challenge of having to almost rage quit to get through them.
Yeah, well, again, gaming, subjective medium.
I think one of my most like frustrating parts was in chapter 11, where you're in the customs house, like the temple area,
Yeah.
where all the shit. And like when you get to that one big room with the machine gunner in the back,
Oh yeah.
coming down the stairs, I'm like, God, like I switched from crushing to hard early on, like I think chapter 4, but like picturing this part on crushing, it gave me
I think
anxiety.
I think that is the single hardest encounter in the game.
Oh yeah,
Like I think like there's a couple of spots, and like just as a quick tangent, sometimes the checkpoint system can really screw you, and you'll die and you'll reload back into a spot that you're practically already about to die again. So you kind of have to like there's a little bit of fun in trying like, okay, that's the wrong move, this is the right move. It's like
It's like an Edge of
Edge of
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, exactly like Edge of Tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a little bit of fun in that, but then when that continuously happens in a ton of different scenarios, when you like just let me get to cover, give me a chance, right? Then it gets annoying. But
like you have
anyways, yeah,
you have the machine gunner shooting at you. You have two guys on the right, one with the revolver that can like instantly kill you, at least on hard.
on
And then you
crushing
have,
instant kills you.
yeah, like, and like you have five guys on the left just shooting you with AKs or 9mm. Like God, and you only have this one like brick of cover.
So I kind of want to explain just in a minute how much fun that can be on crushing difficulty because it adds like a sense of timing
Satisfaction.
to it. Well, there's a satisfaction of it, but you really have to kind of like you have to kill these guys really quick. You have to hit the headshots. If you don't hit the headshots, you're not going to progress through the room fast enough, and then you can get it flanked. It can be very frustrating, but honestly, when you do it, and you do get the satisfying quick headshots off, or you poke guys out of cover and then kill them, and you manage to like really, it's it's almost like you speed run. You kind of like optimize the room once you find the optimal route, and it's honestly really fulfilling once you do it. But it like the difficulty suggests, it can be really crushing when you just like you're doing things and nothing's working.
Like you kind of almost have to plan it. Like after like the fifth death, it's like okay, I'm gonna kill the guy with the revolver, take his gun, kill the next three guys, save by one bullet for the machine gunner,
Oh,
and then
especially
hope
if
for
you're
the
rolling on a
best.
checkpoint with low ammo.
Oh God.
Well, just some frustrations I had with the game that I just want to point out quickly is some of like the feedback that you'll get is a little unclear. Like I know there's times that I've been shot while I was in cover and not like peeking out, like just straight up shot through a wall. And also how you can be shot while you're rolling. I don't know, it seems like they're maybe they just didn't tune that properly because it seems like it's discouraging you from doing the only thing you really can do to prevent yourself from being shot. And I know that's really just a small thing, but it happened often enough that I remember it happening.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't help that all the enemies are kind of just hit scan. It's like,
when
oh,
when rolling between cover, you won't get hit. It's when you roll in the open that you'll get lit up for sure.
did anyone ever like, I guess, cheat the cover system?
Right hand roll all the time,
Yeah, like
like all the
where you
time.
don't exactly like you don't press circle, you just like aim.
Yeah, you're not in cover, but you're just kind of hiding in it. And that's
Yeah,
another thing that I want to praise this game for. I mean, there's only a couple, but the switching shoulders to aim is super fluid
oh,
and
Mm,
super
so
yeah.
crisp.
nice. It works really well when you're like moving around corners and areas without much cover. And I mean, sure, you can call that cheating the game, but it's still fun.
Oh yeah,
Do you want to talk about the puzzles, Mark?
yeah, sure. So I think from my memory, and I beat the game back in Tuesday. I think there's not a whole lot of puzzles. I think the only ones that stand out is the library room, and there was one other.
I mean, there's only what, 4 puzzles in the whole game?
Yeah, something like that. I thought they were more engaging than Skyrim's. Like
I think they
it's.
were pretty on par with Skyrim's.
I mean, like it's interesting. Like you can, you press the touchpad and you open up the book. You say, okay, I gotta match the symbols with this, and then rotate this. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
it's very like Indiana Jones, and it's
Yeah,
the theming is definitely there, but
and like none of the puzzles are hard either.
no,
Like they're
no.
very like, oh yeah, you can do this, and the
I
game kind of.
struggled with the library one for like
Oh,
maybe
I
30 seconds before I
same.
was
yeah.
like, what's going on here? But yeah.
Yeah. Then once you realize, oh, I have to turn this one specifically in the other direction. It's like, okay, there we
I
go.
think it's more just there. I enjoyed it just for the novelty's sake. Like you always see him, like he has this notebook, right? And then you have to use the notebook to solve puzzles, and he's got other doodles in it, and it's really well designed. I just thought it
It,
was like a nice addition to the game.
it immerses you. You're a treasure hunter. You're trying to find all this stuff. Someone may have put puzzles and traps to hide it, and you're using the notes you've taken throughout the game, and it's
For such an old game, I was blown away.
yeah,
Yeah,
it really adds to the world building of it, I think. Whereas if you were just gonna walk through, corridors and temples and just shoot enemies and deal with combat encounters, it would feel a bit less like a adventure or exploration of something.
Even if they just put like the key on the wall, like Skyrim does, where you just find the answer to the puzzles on the wall.
Hmm.
I mean, it would be nowhere near as effective. I mean, it's still the same puzzle, right? But it's the presentation of it.
Yeah, I found that a lot of the puzzles as well used the platforming, and even the library is another example where you're just jumping from one of these bookcases to the other to deal with the sort of interactable elements for the puzzle. And it just seems like a lot of the time the puzzles involved some like type of platforming in it, as that was like one of the only other non-combat mechanics in the game aside from climbing. So at that point it's kind of like it feels weird, especially just because I don't think the platforming feels great in the first place.
Well, what's interesting is that like they've done platforming puzzles like this in Uncharted One in like their previous titles, and especially in Jack and Daxter throughout that series. From my memory, can't I can't remember any specifics at the moment, but I do remember like there's like some puzzles where you have to perform like a bit of a platforming stint, and then it's like okay, then you can progress on forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like slightly more engaging than if you were just walking on the ground between all these different puzzle elements. So
Yeah,
Sure, yeah.
especially when you get to I think it was chapter 16. We're in the underground temple place trying to
Like
get
under
into
the library.
yeah under the library, and like when you have to you're using the book and you have to based on the Roman numerals go the direction that it's telling you to go to versus like all
Oh
the
yeah,
other.
I remember that one.
I was like, oh, this is cool. And then up until the point where you turn on the water wheel and then you have the flaming
swinging
cables,
lanterns, yeah.
swinging lanterns, and that's like, oh god.
That one was actually such a bastard to speedrun. I don't know what it is. I think I almost did it like my second try, and then I must have gotten in my own head. But man, that was such a nightmare to try and do. Because again, like with the controls, it's largely a platforming one, and how like slow and floaty they can feel, especially when jumping, and it just feels like you kind of levitate off and just move forward. It was just not. It definitely drove home how not weighty and grounded some of the platforming can feel.
Oh, yeah, the physics of the jumps always seem very like
Questionable.
you're
Very
going
questionable.
you're going for a ride on this one.
Well, I want to talk about, I guess, the climbing in this game and in other games, because now this is like a very prevalent feature that you see in all kinds of AAA like action games, like Horizon Zero Dawn and geez, I don't know. You can just name one, and it probably has climbing in it at this point.
Prince of Persia. I don't know.
Modern day AAA title,
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry.
Anyway, and 2007 like also saw the release of Assassin's Creed, which was probably the most prolific climbing game, if you will. Um, Although I guess there's also Shadow of the Colossus. But I mean, Assassin's Creed, I think, really pushed it to the forefront and
It
made it this
focused
big
on that
feature.
mechanic, yeah.
Yeah. And made it more engaging. And anyway, what I'm trying to say is, at least in the case of this game, I didn't find it to be all that engaging or really that fun. I mean, like I said earlier, it's really just a matter of holding the right direction on the left stick and then jumping at the right time, which from a theming and narrative perspective is fine. But when you're doing it so much, I don't know, it got a little tiring a bit. But I think it's good to look at like other games where it has been done maybe a little better. And I want to talk about Assassin's Creed Brotherhood for a second, where they actually have a very similar segment in Brotherhood where you're jumping through like old cathedrals, old basilicas, which was probably incidentally inspired by this game a little bit. And what's fun in those ones is when the climbing has a flow to it, which is something Assassin's Creed has always done really well. Like when you're really just like moving quickly and like pulling yourself from one peg to the next or swinging off a rod and like you feel that momentum, like you feel like you're actually progressing through the level, which you don't really get in this game as much.
Which is a good point because again, like the Assassin's Creed thing, you just kind of hold the trigger to free run and you kind of just hold the
Do it.
direction and you climb and you do it,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's a big difference in the presentation of it, whether or not it's not any more challenging gameplay wise. It might even be easier because sometimes the Uncharted climbing system can be janky, right? It's better because it's presented in a better way. You get a feeling of speed, like Sanic, and
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about the whole climbing and other games that have done it, and it really does seem that most games don't really have an idea of how to do it, like, and turn it into engaging gameplay. Like, there's climbing because for whatever contextual reason, there's climbing. You have to climb up something, and like Assassin's Creed, and in the same type of way, like Uncharted, you hold a button, go forward, and the game does it for you with some timing elements maybe thrown in here or there. And even modern titles like Horizon, it's the same idea. God of War had some climbing, same idea. It's follow the path that's fairly obvious and maybe deal with one or two obstacles that aren't that difficult. And I think the complete opposite, sort of on the spectrum here, would be Breath of the Wild, just because the climbing is entirely freeform. Anything vertical you can climb as long as you have the stamina. But then that kind of falls into, well, there's absolutely nothing engaging. You're just going up, but you can go up anything. And I realized that the best games that I've ever experienced with climbing were games that focused on parkour as the main gameplay mechanic. Mirror's Edge and Dying Light. Both of these games have engaging climbing because that's what the game's built around, is fun movement. And it creates environments where you have to think about how to get from point A to point B using the movements your character is able to do and avoid, other world obstacles or other obstacles in the world, and whether that's enemies or environmental obstacles. It made it more fun. It has that flow like Assassin's Creed, but it's engaging.
because you actually have to put inputs.
Right. You have to think
Yeah.
about it.
I mean, from a level designer's perspective, I can see why climbing is so enticing. I mean, if you want to add verticality to your levels without just putting in stairs or ladders, which are both are arguably a lot more boring than just climbing, then it makes sense to put that in. Like
But at
if you
what
imagine
point is
all
it
the
the
times,
same?
like if you went to the fortress in Uncharted and there was just a huge ladder and you just climb it, like that would definitely be less effective than
But
you climbing
in
around the
terms
outside.
of mechanics and how it feels to play, it's essentially like climbing a ladder. You just point a direction and go.
It's true, but I think there is some value to at least just the immersion that it adds.
Well, it's got to
Or
be
Right.
about the context of why you're doing it. It's not just what you're doing; it's about the context of why
Right,
you're
but it's
doing it.
the issue of wanting to include something for presentation or narrative purposes without making it an engaging when, either because they didn't know how to, which, was a older
Fair
game,
enough.
and or they just didn't bother. I mean, games at this point, there's almost no reason not to try to make it more engaging, but they seem to have just gotten into this pattern of this is how climbing works in games. It's fine. We'll move on. Where I was saying that there is these other style of games that did figure out how to do it. The problem is incorporating the fun movement from those into a game where that's not necessarily the main focus.
Well, also, like you bring up Mirror's Edge and Dying Light, and they're both first-person, like free-running games versus this.
Right,
game.
but I mean, what's the difference in terms of how you want to implement that? There's not, it's just changing the perspective.
I guess like the only real time you ever feel like engaged with the climbing is like when you're like you have to time your swing and you can actually control how fast you're swinging
Yeah,
to
and
get
I
to the
could do
next
that
level.
in the Wind Waker, and it felt a lot more fun.
Well, Cam, you brought up the context for the climbing, which I'm glad. I think that is a good point, and maybe I'm getting ahead of us a little bit here. But Shadow of the Colossus is a great example of a game where the climbing is on paper pretty boring, but the context of climbing up the giant colossi and having them try to shake you off
Ooh,
while you're going up
so
there, it's
exciting.
yeah, it's more exciting. It's interesting, even if what you're actually doing is not necessarily that interesting on
But
paper.
even then, I mean, I have not played it yet. I've seen bits and pieces, and I've heard people talk about it. But as far as I understand, they include the sort of having to grip and hold on when the thing starts to try and shake you off through however,
That's
like
right.
either it's
Yeah.
fur or whatever. But even that is adding some type of engaging mechanic to it, where you
It
have
is
to
another
think about it
dimension.
That's
slightly
true.
more than just climbing, stopping, climbing, stopping.
But I think one reason why it like the fast running games like Mirror's Edge wouldn't work in a 3D space is because if you're trying to have tight controls, it would be probably very annoying in a third person to also have to try to control the camera and adjust your character at the same time while trying to move swiftly through areas that like require like in Mirror's Edge, for example, you have to like duck, hit a springboard, turn around, and like wall run up something all within like a matter of a couple of seconds. I don't think if you were in a third person camera, like unless it was a fixed camera and you could see everything from like a very well placed camera vantage point, I don't think it would function nearly as well.
I mean, I think that there's ways that it could be done, and someone smarter than me could probably figure it out. It's just that it doesn't seem like people are trying to figure it out.
Oh, like going forward, maybe sure, but I just don't think it worked for this game. Also,
Yeah.
again, just not thematically what I really want Nathan Drake to do, unless he was running away from like a big boulder or something. But then they're
But
just
going
ripping off
like,
Crash Bandicoot. So
yeah, going back to Uncharted, I just feel like the climbing is not engaging, and it almost just does feel like climbing a ladder, just
yeah,
going different directions.
It goes back to what I said earlier. Like they hit the bare minimum aspects of certain gameplay mechanics, and then that's just it for this title at
I think it's
least.
a fair criticism.
And I mean, again, we've already said it 100 times, but like, this was a 2007 game, and there wasn't like climbing in every single game like there is now. So,
I mean, this is when it started.
well, exactly.
Assassin's Creed, Uncharted.
I just kind of had another thought. So two things that we've talked about in this game that were starting to hit the mainstream AAA game market: climbing and like third person cover shooters. There were like it had both, and there were two games that came out alongside it that did either of them better. So
That's true. But I would argue that it probably has a better narrative than both of them.
Right,
Better narrative
I would agree.
experience.
Like the narrative is
in
definitely
in a
strong.
cinematic format, I think so.
Right.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
that's really what they were going for more so.
yeah, I mean, anyone who has seen Indiana Jones n- absolutely sees the parallels between these.
It's not a
I
difficult thing to grasp.
No, and I every time I've played it, I feel like that's what they were trying to do. Like they were trying to give me the Indiana Jones experience, but interactive. And I think in terms of that, it was successful. It's the narrative can be as shallow or surprising as Indiana Jones was, and I think it hit its mark in terms of feeling like that.
Yes, I definitely think Naughty Dog intended this game to just be like a summer blockbuster experience. Like if you could probably like strip away the game itself and just have it be like a movie, like a CGI movie, and it'd probably do its point. Like narratively, you play Nathan Drake, who is like an everyday treasure hunter. Like he's just a casual guy. Just
Yeah, you know
thrown into this
your
world.
usual treasure hunter you bump
Yeah.
into on the street. Yeah.
Yeah, like Joe in like the grocery store. But yeah, like, and I guess going from like slightly back to a gameplay perspective, like Nathan Drake is kind of just like what, maybe early 30s. Like he's
Probably.
probably not in the fittest of shape. I mean, he can climb.
He does all right.
He does all right, right? Like they could be from a gameplay into a narrative perspective. It could be like, oh, we intended the controls to be kind of sluggish because he's Nathan Drake. He's just an average Joe. He has
That's got to be pushing it for me. I don't think a game would try to add sluggish controls.
I know, but like going to like Assassin's
Well,
Creed.
actually, we'll talk about this soon, but I think we may have a conversation there for Shadow of the Colossus, but carry on.
Well, not because he's fat.
Yeah.
Well, like going back to like characters like Altair in Assassin's Creed, you're an elite trained assassin versus I'm Nathan Drake, treasure hunter extraordinaire. Like,
But yeah, I definitely agree. This definitely feels like the Hollywood blockbuster becomes a video game. And I mean, Nathan Drake is your handsome, rugged, roguish quipster, and of course, he is pretty much an action hero, I would say. And
yeah,
he's got his mentor figure, and you've got like the
Love interest.
the love interest, which of course he gets at the end, which is a foregone conclusion, pretty much. But yeah, I mean,
wait until Uncharted 2, my friend.
yeah.
Don't spoil it.
Oh, no spoilers.
And I mean, I think it works here. There's definitely a charm to it, and the writing and the voice acting is good enough to carry it, I think, through that.
Well, it's funny. I found the voice acting to be actually fairly good. I mean,
I thought
even
it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Almost every character.
they did a good job with it. Every character feels like they're real. This is a real person. However,
main characters.
the writing felt more than a few times like that Hollywood B action movie.
Mm.
You got these shoehorn sort of sexual comments or crude jokes that, I mean, it likely was intentional to hit that feeling of this 80s action flick, but it kind of feels aged at this point, just in terms of that. Otherwise, I think it absolutely has fantastic acting and presentation, especially the remaster.
Oh yeah, like especially when you hear like the banter between two characters. Well, because again, like most of the time you're spending the game just as Nathan Drake alone, and there's like certain chapters where you have either Sully or Elena, and you get that banter between the two of them or the three of them.
Yeah, there was good banter. I want to say actually there was I thought a lot of missed opportunities to have more of that, because I noticed there was quite a lot of times where you were walking around with Sully or Elena and there was a lot of like silence in between and you were just walking. I'm like, well, they probably could have filled this with some dialogue.
It's definitely a fine line where they have to find the point where there's enough dialogue, but not to the point where people don't shut up and you're just trying to play the game.
That's true.
And I do want to point out that despite me sort of complaining about a bit of the writing, I do think that the game as a whole is definitely a sort of welcome bit of variety than typical sort of gritty realism that a lot of things are going for more.
I think Perry hit the nail on the head by saying it's got a charm. Like there's a charm to like the campy like action movie style it has going on.
And it gives you a nice breather between other things.
Yeah, like it goes back to what you said before. Like this is like Indiana Jones, the game. Like
Mixed
it's very
with Tomb Raider.
mixed with Tomb Raider, and like you're kind of like this comedic, optimistic guy.
Yeah, you're the attractive, manly man who gets things done and gets the girl at the end. And he's got a great sense of humor
and a great jawline.
Yeah.
Young Nathan Fillion, right there.
This definitely like marks like the beginning of an age, at least for me, where video games really started to have better narratives with better voice acting and better presentation. Like kind of the start of the last gen is when it really took off, and I think this was probably a big part of that.
And I actually wanted to say with the we're all sort of talking about how lighthearted and funny it is. as our character mows down hundreds of foreigners in this land while he attempts to get some treasure. And they're not made to be great people, but it's this sort of dissonance between what you're doing in the game versus what the narrative is sort of presenting you with.
Yeah, the lighthearted, haha.
That's what the kids these days are calling ludonarrative dissonance, which is the conflict between the game's story and gameplay. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This is something that is apparent right from the get-go, right from the prologue, chapter 1, where you're on the boat with Elena. They're cracking jokes, having a good time. You break open the coffin, like, oh, nice, this is going to be like a fun adventure. And it's like, oh no, pirates are
Pirates.
coming. Here, take this
Whoops.
gun so we can kill them. And it's like, oh my god, what?
we got to defend ourselves. Let's just go for headshots.
Here I
It's
go
more than-
killing again.
It's more than just the one guy too. You're killing a group of people, blowing up explosives on their boats.
And then the sequence ends and it's making jokes about insurance. So
And he
it's-
isn't like phased about it at all. It's like, oh yeah, I've done this before. It's mows down hundreds of pirates and whatnot.
I mean, this is definitely a larger problem with a lot of narrative-focused video games. Where they try to have these charismatic and relatable main characters, but the gameplay demands that they kill, demands that you kill just by the nature of it.
I think this one is probably one of the worst offenders. Like this one struck me almost right away as like, what? This is not
Yeah.
what I
Well,
was
it's because it's
expecting.
so at odds with the tone of it.
Yeah.
Like Nathan Drake doesn't seem like a killer, really. He's a thief.
No, not at all.
Especially when like later in the chapter when he and Elena are like, we gotta get off this island. This is getting too serious. Like, bro, you were just killing like 50 guys just then. Like,
it's been serious.
yeah, it's been serious.
My New Year's resolution was to keep my kill count under 500 for this year.
I mean, a more recent game that's done something to almost address that idea is the Tomb Raider reboot from 2013, where she did the same. Tomb Raider is almost like it's Uncharted with a different skin in a way, but
Yeah, this is just Man Raider.
Dude Raider, they call it.
But in the reboot, you start off not as this person who's willing to just go and start killing people. It's you're trying to survive and you're trying to hide and you're trying to get around people, and suddenly, for narrative reasons, stuff happens, you get caught, and you're almost you're forced to start killing in order to survive and to help your friends. And it makes a point the first time you kill someone, and from there it sort of ramps up. But it was just something that they added to make it feel like you're not just it's another Tuesday for you and you're
Yeah.
up and blowing up the locals.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I appreciate that when they add the weight to what is really a pretty awful thing. I mean, obviously it's a video game where you shoot people. It's not the first time it's happened, but if you're gonna have a serious narrative or really a narrative of any kind that's meant to be taken seriously, yeah, I think they have to deal with that somehow.
Yeah, I think the gameplay should match the intensity or what they're trying to do with the narrative. Where, like we've been saying, I don't think Uncharted necessarily does, because it has fairly serious gameplay and in terms of the implications and what your character's doing, and then the narrative itself is fairly upbeat and campy overall.
Narratively, like it seems like Nathan is kind of more of a guy that would just like run away, like try to escape by the skin of his teeth and just avoid conflict whenever possible.
Yeah, like weasel out of it.
Yeah, I think comes down to an issue of a developer trying to figure out how, like, what to add to make something like, what's the game? Like, if there wasn't shooting and combat in Uncharted, then what's the game?
Yeah. Especially if you just reduce it. If you just
Yeah.
reduce the amount of people you have to kill, well then there's just like less game and it's
Yeah.
not
Well,
as
they would have to fundamentally change what the game is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think it's almost a deeper conversation about how combat has become the default for a lot of games,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily always fitting for it.
Yeah, I mean, there are games that you can have a reasonable suspension of disbelief regarding your character's ability to kill indiscriminately, but usually it makes sense. Like if it's Call of Duty, you're a soldier, or if it's Assassin's Creed, that's literally your job to kill people.
If I booted up SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, and suddenly I got this.
That's a jam.
Yeah, suddenly I bust into the chum bucket and start shooting up the customers.
What customers?
Bikini Bottom GTA. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah, like again, Nathan Drake's just this average guy that, from a gameplay wise, like what? Why is he killing all these people?
Yeah, there's no sound explanation given for why you should expect him to just be able to do this.
Like, I guess self defense, maybe. I mean, would I attempt to start shooting at pirates if I was in that kind of situation? Maybe not. Maybe I would just surrender and hopefully I live.
Yeah. I think you really just have to suspend your disbelief and just let it happen.
Yeah.
I had a thought about it where in some games like Tomb Raider you mentioned, the kills feel like there's more weight to them, right? Like each individual kill feels like you've more killed a person and you're not just on to the next one, right?
Yeah.
But in this game, I think there's a certain gameplay aspect where it's almost like a horde mode, right? Where if you're not killing these guys as fast as they're showing up, they will surround you and they will flank you and you will like die pretty quickly. So you do have to, let's get on with this here.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like or it's reminiscent of Time Splitters, the arcade cabinet, where
Oh
these
yeah.
Time
guys are
Crisis?
just targets. Your Time Crisis, yeah, it's you're just blowing through them, getting to the next room, blowing through them.
That's actually so funny that you mentioned that because I was just playing it the other day and I was thinking of when you hit the guys with like the revolver or the deagle, the sniper, they like fly backwards. In this
Now, one thing we actually haven't talked about in terms of the sort of story yet is how, again, akin to Indiana Jones, there's a supernatural twist at some point in the middle
Yep.
where it's something that at this point you might see coming, but then I don't, it was a nice surprise for me. Where it was like, you've spent this whole time fighting faceless goons and guys just shooting at you, and suddenly there's this like, so you're in a dark underground thing, and this horde of like vampire zombie monsters start running at you, and it shook up the gameplay a bit and the narrative, and
Yeah.
it was a really interesting sort of way to spin it, where it's not they're finding this treasure and you're fighting for the treasure.
I do really like that it wasn't just this treasure has value because it's made of gold. That's it. That's all the
Right.
plot is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Twist.
definitely spent like the first half of the game wondering if this game had any supernatural elements, like if it was like Tomb Raider or if they were just gonna play it straight. And like you mentioned, the vampire zombies. I don't know what they're called, but
They're called the Descendants.
oh, okay, the
I had to look that
Descendants.
one up.
So the Descendants, they definitely, I agree, changed up the pacing of the gameplay for the better
Oh yeah.
when they showed up.
And this game has been a cover shooter up until this point, but after any encounter with them isn't a cover shooter sort of.
Now we're running and gunning through a
Yeah.
Nazi submarine base.
It's like a
so it
survival area.
changes up how you have to play the game, and it makes it a bit more fun because of it.
And now that you mentioned the Nazi submarine base, I want to say this game actually has a pretty good variety to the set pieces that it uses. For the first few chapters, you're just like it's mostly jungle with a little bit of ruins, and then you kind of go to that sunken city, and you can kind of go inside some of the different buildings there that have interesting architecture, and then of course the Nazi submarine base, and I think for a game that just takes place on an island, it's a good amount of variety that also makes sense thematically, narratively.
Yeah, I think it definitely was able to shake up what you expect to come next in a very interesting way, just in terms of locations and playgrounds for where you're able to interact.
And going forward with how we've kind of talked about how some of the climbing elements and some of the gameplay elements can get kind of tired. Where if you were just to be shooting and climbing in the same kind of jungle and above ground ruin set pieces the whole time, it gotten a little bit boring. I mean, it already did get a little bit boring, but having like a little bit of fresh visual aids definitely helps the game progress in an interesting way.
Yeah, it's change in environment is something that shouldn't be taken for granted.
Absolutely.
Especially how like in this, like when you get to the underground Nazi base, you're almost in like a different game almost, because like now it's like this horror survival where you have to have as much ammo as you can as these waves of zombie vampires keep coming at you until you turn on the power.
I think they're called Descendants.
Oh yeah, sorry. Descent.
Holy shit, destroyed.
Oh,
Um,
Just
and not
kidding.
to continue to beat this dead horse, but it's
But
funny
we
that
must.
we must. It's funny because the whole Nazi inclusion in this and their base and how they'd been experimenting with this and trying to get it. Indiana Jones through all three movies includes interactions with Nazis.
mhm. It's very convenient for story writing.
Yeah, and it just goes again to show how much it inspired.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were paying homage definitely with that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no live Nazi characters that you're interacting with.
no,
It's very
yeah.
much just like a backdrop.
Well, the Descendants are.
Some of them, yeah, for sure.
well, like yeah, because like El Dorado is essentially a sarcophagus for a virus, and then that has just infected at first the entire Spanish colony, and then later when the Nazis arrived, they realized it's
and
like
that's
oh,
why they had sunk in the city.
yeah,
So what was there? There was the sort of revelation or realization that El Dorado meant something other than the city of gold. Am I wrong there?
yeah, it meant the Golden Man.
Right. So I thought that was an interesting, another little subversion, even if it's not that significant. But something that you would have expected wasn't the case, and it added to the narrative there.
Yeah, it didn't go exactly where you thought it was because you'd seen a Disney movie.
Right.
Like I definitely like how, and if we ever get to it, like in the later Uncharted games, you always see how they take like classic, legends, and then kind of like add a twist to them. I won't spoil anything, but it's interesting where like how this game starts it off and then where it goes from into the next titles.
It's nice that they take a little bit of license with the stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something pretty recognizable for a lot of people, El Dorado, like just what that means on a surface level. Most people would equate that to like a lost city of gold or lost treasure of some kind. So it's easy to make that connection for the average person.
And I definitely like how the story connects to like the age of exploration with like, Sir Francis Drake and like given that alt history esque to what has happened in real life.
Wait, this didn't happen in real life?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, Nathan Drake's a real guy. Lives in the States.
Wife
He's
and kids.
totally related to Sir Francis Drake.
Seems legit. So I understand that they did for the animations a lot of motion capture. Do you want to talk about that, Mark?
Yeah, it was actually I think it was a week or two ago. In, I guess preparation for Uncharted 1. I looked up a making of video of Uncharted 1, and I guess this was kind of like the start of mocapped animation, like cinematics and cutscenes and whatnot. Because I can't recall any games around 2007 or 6 or 5 or whatever using a lot of mocap.
Well, I can't provide you any examples, but I know they were using it. They've been using it for a long time,
Right.
even before Uncharted, just not probably to the extent that they ended up using it here.
Yeah, I mean, Uncharted's probably one of the first major narrative games that could really take advantage or use the capabilities that motion capture grants in terms of how animation in cutscenes and in game.
Yeah, like I definitely think Uncharted, when in terms of animation, like they kind of add like an actual layer because they record a mocap and then they add, I guess, contextual and like layering to it. So like when Drake is running and then all of a sudden he's being shot, like you'll see him try to like duck and bob and weave as he's being shot at, unless you get killed.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of nice little touches, and even for a 2007 game, it does seem quite impressive. Although I will say that the running animation feels a little stiff.
Yeah.
Ooh, super janky, especially when you get caught on things. You're just trying to like round like a piece of cover or something, and you can see Nathan Drake like start to slow down as he like kind of gets caught on something.
Yeah, like the pile of rubble that he has to jump over without any player input.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, like as weird as it can be to kind of move around the environments and see like Drake kind of start to transition to like move up against things and then you move past it and then he stops transitioning to them. There are some things in the game like the way he climbs stairs is super good. Like compared to other games where you kind of just like
Float
your
up them.
feet would your feet would move and you just kind of float up them. If you go through and watch his feet actually land on different steps and it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, there's definitely lots of examples of the detail they went into to make it a bit more uh, real, a bit more immersive, and that's a good example, I think, where they, a lot of the games do that with the sort of floatiness up steps, just because why add the sort of strain on processing and displaying the graphics and rendering the objects with, you're tripling the amount of surfaces for a set of stairs if it's just a slope with a texture of stairs put where that is compared to actually modeling the steps so the character climbs up it, but it also makes it a bit more risky in terms of how your character model interacts with it because now it's based on physics and uh, collision, so it can really add a bit of risk there.
Yeah, whatever they did to figure that out, they were well ahead of their time.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
I think another point, like detail that really stands out, is when Nathan either runs through water or like dodges through water. You actually see his clothes get, wet. And like a lot of games at this, like when it first released, like a lot of games didn't like have that level of detail. I find.
Did it have fish AI? Did the fish run away?
Oh, I don't think so.
I think they've
Not
had that since the Majora's Mask. So
Yeah, no, I mean, like, clothes getting wet in games, it's definitely been an effect that they've had for a long time, but the amount of detail maybe and how saturated it looks or stuff might have improved in this game.
Yeah, especially when like you're in the Amazon jungle, the sun's beating out, and then your clothes are like I know a lot of games where like you run through water, it's like you come out of water, it's like, oh yeah, my clothes are now dry. Whereas in this, like your clothes kind of like slowly get dry as you continue playing because you're
Much
running
more
through.
realistic.
Yeah, much more realistically.
A lot of that you can chalk up to the remaster. The remaster, you can go and look at the videos that show you side by sides, and they did a really nice job remastering it. One of the obvious things is people are a lot less shiny, and the use of shadow is way better. It feels like in the original one, like the only contrast they had was like brightness and darkness and shadow, but it feels like in the remaster they more use colors and shades of colors, so things kind of backgrounds mesh better and like random things don't feel like they're popping out. And even just like the face, like the difference in between the PS3 and the PS4, just things like Nathan Drake's like 5 o'clock shadow and stuff looks like way better.
You can definitely tell the particular hour of the shadow there.
I mean, I'd like to mention. I mean, we've been playing and talking about a handful of remasters on the show in previous episodes. Some of which we didn't think were that great, but I think this is actually probably one of the better remasters out there.
It's a great example of what they can do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a list of things that they did there to improve it. And so, as you mentioned, Cam, they added higher resolution on the character models. They improved the lighting. They made it so it runs at 60 FPS, 1080p. Improved draw distance, and they added they added brutal difficulty. So if you played the original, that wasn't there.
We're talking about improvements here.
Yeah. They added the speedrun mode and the little tracking leaderboards that'll show up when you do certain actions in game. And they also upped the speed of the camera movements and redid the aim assist. So they actually did all these things we've been complaining about in the previous episodes by actually making an effort to
Wow.
improve the game.
I couldn't imagine how slow the camera would have been before because that is wow. That is definitely a gripe I have even still.
Didn't they also add photo mode into the remastered?
That's right. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the obvious presentation, like you mentioned, the lighting, it's right off as soon as you're in that first jungle section. It almost feels like there's volumetric lighting coming through the trees, and you got sort of a bit of god ray going on, and
Mhm.
you forget how old this game really is. I mean, say for the remaster, obviously that game isn't necessarily or technically old, but
Right.
it's a nice coat of paint they managed to get on there.
Another example I'd like to point out is when you do enter those first ruins and you find like the first remains of like the Spaniards and whatever. The difference between the PS3 and PS4 is so huge that areas that you're shining your flashlight in the PS3 almost looks like it's daylight. And in the PS4, it actually looks like it's just like a flashlight illuminating a small area and not fully illuminating. Like it's, there's so
Light
much.
just on
Yeah,
or not.
you're not using a million lux torch there. It's just a regular flashlight.
I will admit, I did have to up the brightness after you solve the library puzzle when you go down, and Elena's the only source with the only light source. I'm like, God damn it, Elena! Why can't I turn on my flashlight real quick? Because I couldn't see like where the dials were to turn.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, I was like, I had to bump it
That
up,
was a
but
small oversight.
yeah,
Yeah, that a sort of effect of creating an almost more realistic lighting system means that things that would have been obvious to see due to the lack of complexity and depth would have fallen into sort of being unreadable or not visually clear.
Well, also, I think adjusting your brightness is just something that you're more more than well expected to do when you start a game, right? If your TV's displaying things a little dark, a little bright, right? Like it's when I'm playing a game, I'm not like thrown out of my immersion. It's like, oh, for the trace of brightness.
Yeah, I
No
know what
other
I
game
feel.
made do this.
Yeah, I mean, most games will have, that initial screen when you're loading it up for the first time, like, the two screens side by side, dark and light, set it so you don't have to deal with this later. And
Yeah, but
after
Marcus,
that, it's probably your fault because
well, in a way,
we would have fucked it up ourselves instead of them doing it.
well, Mark's right in a sense that like it's hard to tell, and that area is specifically fairly dark. So if you did want to play the game, like when I play through games like Metro or Bioshock, I kind of like to have it a little darker, or Dead Space, I kind of like to have the brightness a little darker, just for like atmosphere's sake. But like if it comes to a point where it's affecting the gameplay, then it's like okay, now I have to go back and
Yeah.
adjust it, which is fine. I'm fine with that.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, games that are meant to be darker, like Bioshock and Dead Space, won't usually expect you to try and make out intricate patterns in the dark in the same way that they do in this one segment in Uncharted.
Yeah.
Mhm. And
It's a
in this
small
case, it might have
oversight.
just been a slight oversight. Yeah, so
Yeah.
not much to really blame them for there, I guess.
Yeah, because like as Cam was saying, is like back on the PS3 version, it's a lot brighter compared to what it is on the remastered.
Yeah, the lighting system seems to have changed significantly, so it creates some more depth where there is and isn't light, which can affect the visibility of details.
One thing while we're on the topic of presentation I want to talk about is we talked earlier in gameplay about how dying can kind of cut up the flow of the action. I found that a lot of the cutscenes and stuff can really break up the action in this where they don't feel like they always start naturally. I mean, the cutscenes generally are fairly well done. It just sometimes it feels like they're too frequent and not as impactful as I would like them to be in as a medium to like disrupt gameplay and tell story.
I think one scene comes to mind is when in chapter 5 you're in a fortress, and the moment you drop down onto like this arch, like you get the two black bars coming in, it's like, oh boy, this thing's gonna break, and then immediately goes away and you have to like input, I think, X to jump. It's like, oh, okay.
It's one of the things where I felt like I mean some of the quick time events are kind of annoying. I felt like overall the quick time events weren't was such a drawback, but I feel like there's some times where I wish instead of doing like a little cutscene, if they could have like maybe just stolen my camera and zoomed in on something for a quick minute instead of like playing a cutscene, it would have been a much better way of showing me, okay, this is something that's happening that maybe wouldn't have been aware of otherwise, but it's not taking me like fully out of control of the character and my where I think I am in the space to show me something.
Yeah, cutscenes are definitely used frequently in games as sort of a cheat in terms of uh, explaining or showing something and narrative where they, it was either due to not wanting to attempt it, other reasons, but just not wanting to incorporate whatever the cutscene's trying to say in gameplay.
Hmm.
Well, not to mention they might be using it to mask a loading screen or
Right. And I guess which would have definitely been a bigger issue back when this game was created. But I think, yeah, it's definitely something that's been improved on, but it's still obviously an issue in a lot of games.
what I did appreciate is that like when you're good like transitioning between chapters, it was kind of seamless. It's like
Oh
oh
yeah.
now I'm now in
Mhm.
chapter 5. Like I'm going up to the fortress now. Oh,
I'm not sure if like a lot of that is part of the remaster. And one thing that we didn't talk about in gameplay that I'll mention right now is dying is probably way better in the PS4 one than the PS3 one because you'll load back in like 5 seconds. You are right
oh,
back into the action. And if,
Yeah,
if it's
very
any
snappy.
slower in the PS3 one, if it takes even like 15 to 20 seconds, that would really, really badly kill that game for me.
and like this was again because it was the first installment in the series. Like this is like right as they're about to hit their stride. Because then like in the later like 2 and 3, like they definitely know how to optimize the usage out of the PS3 console.
Yep. Nice. Well, I think we'll move on to our final round, question round. And so we're gonna start with Evan. Do you think this game should have been longer or shorter, or do you think the length was pretty good?
I think the game might have overstayed its welcome for the depth that the gameplay does actually allow. I sort of narratively it seems to hit more or less the right length, though I do remember sort of near the end of the game, maybe around chapter 19, I was sort of I did look up when I played it the first time, like how much of the game was left because I sort of it almost felt like it was coming to the end, but then it didn't. It felt like there was still a lot more, and I wanted to know how much I had left of the game, and I found out there was, maybe like 3 or so chapters left, and I was surprised because it seems like the pacing there would suddenly just ramp up to end the game. So in that case, I think the narrative could have been paced better to create a more concise story and game. If it lost an hour due to, being more, efficient in that. I don't think it would have been a bad thing because by the end, I do think the gameplay overstayed its welcome for me a bit because it is aged. It's not cutting edge anymore. It is a bit rough and janky, more often than it should be, and I think any longer would have just been grueling.
Yeah, I would agree. I think definitely once you come to your 30th firefight in an open arena with chest high walls, it's like, all right, well, let's get this going. Let's go get the El Dorado.
It also takes forever to just find Elena. I mean, I they could have shortened that up. I mean, I like the part about how, you find her like empty parachute in the plane crash and stuff like that. But I mean, I feel like we could have like condensed it a little bit more. So you find the wreckage of the plane, and then you find the parachute, and then you actually find her like kind of within a more reasonable amount of time. Like that would have been an area where I wouldn't have complained if they shortened it down. And then again, you're less bored of the gameplay.
I mean, the thing is with longer games these days, it could be less grating just because the way you're interacting with the game has become a bit more interesting. But you know, it- later Uncharted's, I'm guessing they do make your interactions more, a bit deeper, and you don't get sort of tired of them as quickly.
Oh yeah.
Let's move on to Mark. How likely do you think we are to get an Uncharted reboot or remake? And if they did, what do you think they would need to do to make it interesting or worth our time?
Well, having like I guess the Nathan Drake collection just come out like a few years ago, I think we're okay. Like I don't think this game really needs like a reboot or a remake.
Do you think it's possible we'll get Uncharted without Nathan Drake as the protagonist?
I definitely think so, and we already have.
We have, yeah.
Wait, we
Yeah.
have?
Yep.
Am I just stupid?
It's not like it's not Uncharted 5, it's like
Yeah,
Uncharted
it's like a spin-off.
subtitle.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a DLC without needing to own the fourth game.
Yeah, it follows one of the characters from the second and third game.
Yeah.
As
Interesting.
far as I've heard, it's actually quite a good game
Oh.
with good puzzles and stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty solid for a side title. But yeah, like I could see him doing more games like that, and especially how with that game in particular, how that kind of I guess expanded into a bit of a slight open world sense of it. Like I can definitely see them going more that route, like without needing to have Nathan Drake as the protagonist.
And I mean, his story is essentially over, right?
Yeah, his story is over with 4, and I don't want to go into spoilers, but you'll definitely see why.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
like
Well, I
that-
mean, the games industry has definitely showed us that they're capable of necromancy at any point in history. So,
They're not afraid to defile a grave for profit.
yeah, I
I-
mean, 10, 15 years from now, they could say, "Here's Uncharted," like again, but it's new and
like
fresh.
there's already a movie coming out with Tom Holland playing a younger Nathan Drake.
Or remember like the remaster that we just played?
Yeah, that too. Like
I
if they
remember
were
it
to go
fondly.
back,
already. Yeah.
like
I think
mean,
my
it's-
biggest concern with a reboot is like how are they going to try to innovate with gameplay? Because I don't want just more of the
Yeah.
same. If it's just going to be more of the same for more of the same and making money, right? My big thing is like how are they going to change the game?
Give it to Corey Balrog and let him figure it out. He seems to be good at that.
yeah, but like again, like I'm definitely looking forward to what they have in store with the Uncharted series and where they take it.
Though in a way, I almost hope that they take a break from it. You know, it's had a lot of games, and give it time, give them time to come up with something that they are inspired to do
Yeah,
to
more
change
than
it
a
up.
decade of games.
I mean, they need to. They're what? Last of Us comes out in June finally, and I think they should. Naughty Dog should definitely go back and bring a next gen title of Jack and Daxter.
On a next gen
That's-
Crash Bandicoot.
Yes.
There's a series that has not seen innovation in quite some time. What are you guys doing? Anyway,
You know,
yeah.
where's the Crash Bandicoot live action movie?
if they did with Sonic, like
Where's the
Mercy.
gritty reboot?
Mercifully,
Yeah, I definitely don't think we've seen the last of Uncharted, but
oh no,
Yeah,
we'll
100%
have to
not.
see. All right, and last but not least, Cam, do you think that this game should have strived to have more varied gameplay systems, like in its enemies or its weapon variety? How do you feel about that?
I feel like it should have, and I think we kind of touched about this already, like whether or not you think that they tried to have a stealth element and how effective the melee combat was. But as good as I actually think that the shooting can be and how satisfying it can be to like ring out a quick like succession of headshots to be able to progress through an area, it does kind of get tiring. And the few moments that you kind of get to do other things like the platforming, which is not so much fun, and then like the two like jet ski areas, which are
God.
which can be okay. The second one's better because, and I didn't realize till the second time you play through, but you can actually just like blind fire, and Elena will actually target the barrels for
Oh,
you,
I didn't know
so you
that.
don't. Yeah, so
I did not know
it
that.
changes it completely. Not having to stop, and then it becomes a totally valid thing because it's like you're battling with the controls, trying to get upstream, and you have to more or less be facing the barrel, but not exactly, and you don't have to stop and aim, which makes it flow a lot better. Uh, but point being, I think if they did add enemies that had variety in a sense that they have just more than just more health, or they have a helmet on, so you have to kill them with more than one headshot or things like that, or just enemies that play differently. If they made an enemy class that were to try and flank you, you would know that okay, I need to take care of this guy right away in the beginning of these exchanges, or they're going to try to get around me and kill me from behind. They had enemies where like the bigger guys or the guys with armor is like okay, these guys take more shots to kill, but I mean you can
There
still
were
just kill them in
snipers
the
too.
head. Oh yeah, that's well snipers. So
Yeah,
guys
there
farther
was
away.
variance. There's variance in the weapons that they use, but
It was mild.
The
It was-
chunky boy with the shotgun.
It was well.
sometimes the
Again,
chunky boy had a magnum.
Oh,
it's
that's
kind of
true.
like
You had to
it's
watch
kind of
out
like
for those guys.
boring variants, right? It's
Yeah. I think the biggest variety they threw in was the Descendants. I think that's
yeah, that's a good
something-
point. I can't believe I didn't
Yeah.
mention that, but you're right. The
Yes,
Descendants
it's a
do-
very large change in how encounters happen.
And you almost find, well, I don't know, on some of the, even on the harder difficulties, you do find yourself like, well, obviously you're not standing in cover, but you're also not like backed in a corner trying to fend them off. You are trying to run and gun. And even on the higher difficulties where the rest of the game, forces you to sit down in that spot and peek out and hit a quick shot or you're going to die really quickly. I think that is a very important differentiation they make. And also,
Yeah.
same thing with weapons. So I think that it's good that there's different weapon classes, if you will. So there's kind of like the weak pistols, the strong pistols, there's shotguns, there's assault rifles, and there's snipers. and then grenades and explosives. So I guess really the two types are guns and explosives, and melee if you want to count that. But more
Yeah,
or
it's pretty
less,
standard fare for this kind of
yeah,
game.
you progress between the weaker ones to the stronger ones, but there's not really even that much difference. So it's kind of like there's 6 different types of weapons, and they each have another weapon which is just slightly stronger or slightly more accurate.
Going from an AK to an M4.
Oh my god, the AK! I hate that weapon. Just the beginning pistol, honestly, is way more way more
Way
useful
more
in
alive.
crushing. Yeah, because I can actually hit headshots with it reliably. It's way better than the AK. The AK is like the worst gun in that game.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I use sidearms 100% of the game. Especially when you get the 92 FS or the Deagle or the revolver.
Yeah, I think definitely some more variety would help. This one would warrant the length a little more, the length of the game.
But again, I guess it's also comes down to what you like. Because I actually had a lot of fun with the shooting mechanics sometimes when I wasn't, trying to peek out from cover and just aiming at the wrong side of a pillar. Whenever the shooting was working properly, I felt like it played pretty good.
That's actually a good point you bring up that I just wanted to go to quickly. Is oftentimes coming out of cover, you're not aiming where you expect that you're aiming.
Which is
Where
why
you
you gotta
peek out.
jack that sensitivity.
It's definitely a big part of what makes it feel a little off.
Hey Cam, what was your highest headshot streak?
Streak? I
Yeah.
don't know, but I'll tell you right now, I have the highest headshot count on the friends list. So
Okay.
get
Well,
out.
I know for a fact that I surpassed Cam's headshot streak at some point. So,
Oh, sad boys.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, probably
Uh-oh.
because.
But did you do it on crushing?
oh shit,
Oh, okay.
I've been
Ooh.
outed.
My man, Evan, let's go. Let's go. Get
Hey,
at
I'm
me.
here in normal doing body shots, so I have nothing to
Yeah.
earn in this fight.
I'm on that explosive kills.
I was gonna say one last thing, and then we'll get the hell out of here. But if you look at Gears of War, there's a game that has quite a lot of variety, both in its enemies and its weapons.
Oh, the
And
weapons are beautiful.
it's also a big part of what makes that one A, more replayable, and B, more engaging just for the first time playthrough. But yeah. So I think that's going to be everything for us for this episode. You can tune in next time where we're going to be discussing our next PlayStation exclusive title, Shadow of the Colossus. So thank you for listening. This is GameDive.
And thanks for stopping by.
Hey everyone, this is Perry. Thanks for listening to GameDive. Make sure to join in on the discussion below and let us know what your thoughts are about the game. And if you enjoyed the discussion, you can drop us a like. GameDive is a bi-weekly podcast, so be sure to subscribe and check back every other Tuesday for a brand new episode.